4.4 million rand, or suburb depending. You could say that's the price of a decent 4-bedroom house these days. It's also the amount of money that General Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi's much-touted political killings task team spent per conviction over 3 years. That's according to evidence scrutinized by senior UWC researcher Jean Redpath, our guest on The Lead next.
If we just take the extra costs of overtime, etc., it means that each conviction over 3 years cost 4.4 million. Now we cannot spend
That's a lot of money.
that amount per conviction. It's just not feasible. And in the documentation, there's also motivation saying, well, the cases are taking so long in court that our investigators are sitting in court, so we need more investigators who can then be working while the people are in court. But the courts don't work like that. You know, the courts, they sit for 1 or 2 days and then it's postponed.
Later in our trending topic, we take stock of where draw against Zim leaves Bafana Bafana in its final bid to qualify for next year's FIFA World Cup. That conversation with our football journalist Tashreeq Vardien.
We're playing beautiful football. The only thing that's not happening for us is the goals, and which is an unfortunate thing. And if I could just add to that, South Africa has not lost a match since the 2024 AFCON. It's Mali.
Sure.
Yes, we lost to Nigeria, but essentially that was a 1-1 draw. Then it had to go to penalties.
Yes.
And then obviously the Mokoena game. The result that was reversed. We essentially won 2-0 and we reversed to 3-0. So those are the only 2 blemishes, which essentially is not really cutting out defeats.
And finally, we reflect on the country's long LGBTQ plus journey with On This Day in South African history at the end of the show.
New episodes of The Lead air Monday through Thursday at 7 p.m.
If you're listening and you reckon your corporate or business would like to be a sponsor on The Lead on News 24, it's prime real estate for advertising. Feel free to mail us at thelead@24.com. My name's Graham Robenheimer, this is The Lead, and this is the South African story. Moving to our top story today, much of the Madlanga Commission's focus has been on detailing the events leading up to and the alleged reasons why KwaZulu-Natal's political killings task team was disbanded, nearly a year ago now. Outspoken Provincial Police Commissioner Nhlanhla Mkhwanazi has been emphatic that the team's performance is worth applause, and now suspended Minister Senzo Mchunu had no business interfering in the unit's business, allegedly without the president's knowledge thereof. And that the push to get rid of the PKTT was all to shield members of the so-called Big Five criminal syndicate who had infiltrated themselves in the very police establishment. But if we pause, right, and just consider the very evidence table before the Commission itself regarding the PKTT's effectiveness, that's the text in black and white, all the statistics, has it really been all that impressive and worthwhile? Well, the person who's been tasked to look into that is, of course, Jean Redpath. She's a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, UWC, and she argues that the stats, they just don't lie. She joins me live on the line now. Jean, thank you so much for taking time for us here on The Lead today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. I know it's a very busy time of day and the Commission's just restarted its affairs, although in camera for the next couple of witnesses, apparently, so media won't really be able to know, the public won't be able to know what the next witnesses are saying. But you really took this vital opportunity whilst the parliamentary sort of mirrored inquiry, or the ad hoc committee has been busy, ventilating sort of the same evidence thus far. You took this opportunity as the break from Madlanga to really have a discerning look at the submissions handed to the Commission itself. What spurred you to do this?
So what actually happened is one of the news stations asked me to do an interview, a panel interview over the weekend, and they sent all of us, I believe, the annexures. So I assumed that was going to be the topic of the discussion on the panel, and I diligently looked at the annexures, and I was quite surprised and shocked that they hadn't yet been discussed in the Commission by the evidence leaders. They hadn't been raised at all. And so in the television interview, there wasn't much emphasis, and I had to bring it into the conversation. I then decided that perhaps people needed to know about this if it wasn't going to be raised either at the commission or at the ad hoc committee, because in fact we'd actually already heard from both the General Nkwananzi and Masemola in both venues at that stage, and at neither of them had the expenditure been looked at in any kind of detail. And we had these kind of blanket assertions that the task team had been effective.
Yes.
And so I looked into the reports on that too.
Sure, because, Mkhwanazi was basically stating that the conviction rate, and we'll get to this in more detail, I'm sure, in the next few, but that the conviction rate was around the 30% mark, but yet the evidence of what's being submitted, for formal representation sort of in the background, that doesn't sort of get ventilated an awful lot, as you say, in terms of what people are saying into the microphone. That says a different story.
Yes, so, I mean, the report that I looked at in detail was to mid-2021, which was because the annexes ran to hundreds of pages, so it's a lot to go through, and there was a lot of repetition in those annexes. What you see there in the 2021 report is a kind of consolidation of how many people and what had happened so far with their investigations. Now, I have a great deal of sympathy with General Mkhwanazi when he expresses frustration with the prosecution and with the court. So I understand that, there are constraints on that side. And in fact, that's part of my work is also looking at the prosecution and the police. But if we compare after 3 years, what the task team was able to do and the usual sort of throughput rate that was in the public domain back in 2019, 2020, we see that it's not that much different. The South Africa throughput rate at the time was around 13%, and the task team at that point had done 17%. So it's true that cases take more than a year to go through. So all we're really looking at is how many convictions in a year and how many actual murders were committed in a year. And we're just comparing those two figures, and we're asking, does that really match up? Do the convictions match up to what we actually faced with? Now, it is also true that KwaZulu-Natal at that time, I think it's improved now, but at that time had a particularly bad throughput ratio of around 8%. So in his context, it is correct that the task team was doing better than otherwise. But then one has to ask, well, what was it costing to do this better work? And that is the essence of my question, is why is it not possible for ordinary police who are earning their ordinary salaries to investigate these cases? So that is where the angle of my article is really going, is that why do we need to pay overtime, accommodation, daily stipends, laundry, in order to get a slightly improved conviction sort of throughput?
Yes.
Why is it not possible to just leave this to the serious and violent crime units or even to the Hawks? Why is it necessary to have a very expensive task team to do this work?
Yes, and so are South Africans really getting bang for their buck is ultimately the question. If the president's going, I would like this particular unit to be put together in a province which seemingly has a problem, it's getting a lot of resources, it's getting a lot of money, it's getting a lot of sort of power, if you will. And so we as taxpayers, do we sort of just accept that this goes into, that big treasure trove of millions upon billions that gets spent within the budget, and then that's okay? Or, if you're saying that the PKTT is definitely something that brings back gains at the end of the day, well, let's look at that budget a lot closer. And I think the context is going to come key here when we look at the SAPS budget as a whole, Jean, before we get into the minutiae of the PKTT itself. What does that budget say if we talk about irregular spending, and you so expertly describe it very simply, the other side of the line item of the SAPS budget, which runs into the billions, right?
Yes. So the interesting thing is, back in March, April, May, when we when we were having, as a nation, this huge issue around the VAT increase and the fact that we were going to have to raise VAT by 0.5% in order to, make ends meet effectively. I had a closer look at the budgets of the entities that I'm interested in, to see if where the money was going and if any savings were possible there. And I was very puzzled to find under the table of the police that deals with personnel numbers and their cost, that there was an entry for 8 funded posts, which the total cost was 8.5 billion, not million, billion.
Sure.
Which in the documentation works out to 1,070,000,000 each for each of those posts. Now, obviously, this cannot be correct. There cannot be 8 people in the SAPs earning, 1 billion.
Unless they're the president, or even then.
This must be the discretionary expenditure around overtime and these kinds of expenditures that we see for the task team. However, I couldn't get anyone to actually confirm that this was the case. So I'm not sure if that is correct. This is what I'm surmising, that this is the kind of place where all this money, which brings us to the question was, where is the 8.5 billion going? I mean, this task team, 200 and something million over 3 years, is a drop in the ocean. Sure. Compared to the 8.5 billion. So it's a kind of an indicator, beginning of an opening into where a lot of the money is going. Now, I mean, 8.5 billion is a lot of money. I think people don't really have a sense of the totals that we're talking about here. It's a great deal of money, and a lot could be done with it. I mean, I began my conflict with the police around the resources, the allocation of resources to police stations. And every single police station will tell you they don't have enough people, they don't have enough vehicles, they don't have enough fuel for the vehicles. And then we see all of this money being spent in this way, largely unaccounted for, because it's not laid out in the annual report, all the spending on task teams. It's not really dealt with in Parliament. So how is there accountability over these expenditures? Do we just leave it in the hands of the National Commissioner as the accounting officer in terms of the PFMA? Or is there actually a role for the minister to say these are the priorities of our government or not?
Good question.
And, maybe it's violence against women are our priorities. Maybe we want to spend money there. Maybe we shouldn't have such a big discretionary amount. Maybe it should be more closely allocated by Parliament exactly what all the expenditure is for. So these are important questions that I don't necessarily have the answers to, but I think that they are particularly questions that Parliament needs to look at. Are they able to do their oversight job? Do they really know where all the money is going? And are these the priorities of the democratically elected government, in fact?
Right. So, excellently put, Jean. And you really are going to the heart of it. And it's so interesting when you juxtapose everything that you've just so excellently, concisely put with the fact that Mkonazi and the rest have told Parliament that, in actual fact, police powers should be devolved to the provinces as well. So what does that say when it comes down to the budgets as well that are already looking like this? And just 2 other comments to your points regarding Parliament at the moment. I mean, my colleague Jan Gerber is a senior parliamentary correspondent. He wasn't happy with the level of questions that were brought anyway in the ad hoc committee thus far in terms of the evidence. He feels like it's not critical enough. And in actual fact, their own parliamentarians have already pointed to the fact that when Mkonazi was brought to Parliament initially, that no one really, sounded the alarm when it came to Mkonazi's initial claims of this mysterious Brian Mokgotsi fellow. So a lot of questions there. Let's go down now into the minutiae of the PKTT, Gene. It's clear, look, they got a lot more resources here than most. They got a lot of vehicles. They got some senior people to join the unit from the outset because, let's be frank, the instruction came from the union buildings. So let's break down the costs, as you so expertly put, within the first 6 months of the PKTT, and then let's sort of expand from there and then move to the caseload and what that looks like in terms of the overall sort of budget spent. So let's begin with the 6 months. $500,000 for laundry, right?
Yes, so I'm not actually even sure which policy of the SAPS permits that to be an expenditure for a task team. It's the whole kind of the budget overall with the line items for accommodation, transport, etc., suggests a temporary situation where people are having to be away from home. But this went on for 6 years, and this task team was in 5 different regions in KwaZulu-Natal, so they were spread out, so they were not all together in one place. Another puzzling aspect is initially in the first 6 months, only 5 detectives from the detective service, plus 2 from the Hawks, out of 139 members. Now, you're supposed to be investigating political killings, but you have so few investigators, like 1 per region. It just doesn't add up in terms of the ostensible aim of the unit. So that's where my concern really lay with. Are we continuing to pay for people to be in accommodation after 6 years? In hotels, or where they're staying, etc., etc. So it's disturbing that this was rolled over year after year. Once or twice, you can see General Masemola saying, maybe not this item this time, and maybe a little bit less here. And in terms of the vehicles, it was quite clearly stated that the budget for the 30 vehicles would come from police stations, from the police station budget in those areas. Now, KwaZulu-Natal, the data from the Victims of Crime survey shows that people in KwaZulu-Natal are the most likely to say they never see a police vehicle, and they wait the longest for police to come when they need them. And to have 30 vehicles taken away from police station level is significant.
That's less. That's fewer bobbies on the beat. That's less visible policing,
etc., etc. So, and we know that people in KwaZulu-Natal are particularly concerned around that. And so that has to be reassessed. And after 5 years, by the way, they say, oh, you know what? Most of these vehicles are toast now. We need more. So the vehicles literally got used up in 5 years, and they said, oh, they can go back to the police stations. These vehicles that are not suitable for them can go back to the police station. So it's a kind of an entitlement that comes through in the documentation, and a kind of not even an inkling that it might not be approved. It's a sort of a rote reapplication for the funding.
Right. And that overtime cost, Gene, is a very important or a critical point to make, right? Because if you look at it in the breakdown and the figures as you put it in your article, which is currently still doing very well, trending on the front page of News 24, Gene Redpath, political killings task team burned millions, whilst KwaZulu-Natal murder rate exploded, and we're going to get to that conviction murder rate ratio in the next short while. But just to stay on the costs, that overtime figure, 16.4 million rand of that first 6 months of a total budget of 49 million rand, and that is one of the bigger items. It also speaks to this growing culture within South Africa at the moment, because, and I've got a great example, the Mangaung Metro in Bloemfontein has been under national administration for a really long time now because of their terrible finances. They're still not out of the red to this day. It's a lot better now, but they're still not out of the red because overtime costs have become this entrenched culture or idea that, if I work longer, I can just claim for it later, and that's just going to balloon the figure further, and that's just going to make the irregular spending on the line items of the budgets look a lot huger, and it becomes difficult to audit, right? Okay, let's talk about the initial caseload of the dockets that the PKTT was given. What were their successes, and how did this morph over time, Jean, whilst juxtaposing that with the rate of murders or serious crimes in KwaZulu-Natal? And what does this also sort of suggest to you as a senior researcher?
Well, initially there were 67 murders which were sort of flagged as politically related in some way. I'm not sure what criteria they applied for it to be politically related. And then some additional crimes were added to that, which were also said to be politically related, like intimidation or arson or et cetera, et cetera. And it went up to 99. Ultimately, after 3 years, I think it was something like 250. When you see, a relatively significant amount resulted in arrests, but the crunch of convictions is just too low. It's just, I think it was 46, if I'm correct. I don't have the figures in front of me, but it's just not. It means that if we just take the extra costs of overtime, etc., it means that each conviction over 3 years cost 4.4 million. Now we cannot spend
that's a lot of money.
That amount per conviction. It's just not feasible. And in the documentation, there's also motivation saying, well, the cases are taking so long in court that our investigators are sitting in court, so we need more investigators who can then be working while the people in court. But the courts don't work like that. The courts, they sit for 1 or 2 days and then it's postponed. They should be having a continuous role, but they're not having a continuous role. So, there was even a push for more. And I do have sympathy with the desperation around the slowness of the courts. And it's something that really needs to be addressed. It negatively affects everybody, particularly the police who have to give evidence. And with that, I'm really on General Mkhonanzi's side when he says that is a problem. But I mean, you're not sitting in court all day. I happen to know that courts only sit for 3 hours a day. So you can't say that your people are, in court all day. They're not. It's just not happening. That's not how it's happening in reality. So and then 8 of the suspects died, which is also a little bit, taking aback. That's quite a lot of suspects died. At least one case, they said, was resolved via alternative dispute resolution. Now, what does that mean?
What does that mean? Especially in light of a context of torture in many cases, right?
And quite serious matters of intimidation and arson and so on. It began to sound like if you were a politically connected person and you had a problem, you could call on the task team. That was where it was starting to move towards. I'm not saying it was, but the single ADR case, maybe I'm taking it too far, but that shouldn't be what they're doing. They shouldn't be doing ADRM.
Right. Jean, what's your final recommendation here? Because I think we've gotten to the heart of the matter thus far, and I think that fact is so pertinent, and it really stuck out in your piece for me, was that 4.4 million rand was spent on each of the single convictions over the span of 3 years. It's such a telling fact. What is your recommendation here out of all of this? Are you saying, look, if you want to keep the unit in future, it needs to scale down its level of spending in order for it to achieve the goals that it had set itself out initially?
No. So what I would appeal to is what we tend to do is we tend to look at things in isolation. Okay, so we tend to look at, is it a good idea to have specialized courts? And we only look at the specialized court and we say, well, yes, the specialized court does better than the non-specialized courts. But what does it cost to, what what does it mean that we can't do if we're going to have this thing? What is the cost? What are the what else could we do that might be of more benefit to the citizens? And that's the role of elected government, to say, you know what, this is no longer a priority. This is where our priorities lie. That's not for me to say. It's not for me to say that's, but what's for me to say is to point out that these are the financial priorities that they are making, and for them to be aware that those are the financial priorities, and then the elected government must explicitly choose those priorities and account to Parliament for those choices. I mean, it's scary to me, the size of the line items and the lack of detail that gets revealed at Parliament around this kind of expenditure. So it's not for me to say it should be there or shouldn't be there. All I'm doing is pointing out that the costs, and that part of that cost is that the money isn't spent elsewhere, and part of that cost has been that it's been associated with a worsening of the violent crime situation in the province now, and that is the whole country violence got worse over that time period, yes, but the situation in KwaZulu-Natal was more than twice as bad.
Sure.
So we've got to ask, maybe the task team was irrelevant to that, but maybe it would have helped if the resources could have been used for public order policing. Our public order unit of the SAPS is actually relatively good. They are not trigger happy. They are well trained, etc., etc. It wasn't public order police who went to Marikana, for example. If public order police had gone there, we might have had a different outcome. So in the July 2021 riots, for example, if we'd had sufficient public order police, citizens wouldn't have felt abandoned. I mean, it's no surprise that people in KwaZulu-Natal trust the police less than elsewhere after that, and people were literally left to themselves. They could not call on the police for help. And so that is the cost is not just the financial cost, it's what you could have spent the money on, where the priorities could have been.
Yes. And I don't think we haven't heard a lot about that. Just to end off, Jean, I mean, you've made your point so beautifully, and it speaks to what I've been thinking throughout this process is like, cool, good and well, we need to get to the heart of the allegations of criminal capture of the country's justice system. But like so many policing experts are saying and have said in the run-up to the Commission and Parliament, I would like to hear a little bit more of the operational side of what could be done better, as you say, and better, pooling the resources and the money to get that bang for your buck. The only thing that has spoken to that thus far has been this issue of there's too many chiefs and too few Indians when it comes to SAPS Central Command. And that's been one of the stick-out things for me that has been mentioned on the operational side of things. Like, how does this affect the South African at the end of the day? Is this process of what we're seeing on our TV screens every day and in our, the front page of News 24 and in this very podcast, are all of these going to sort of manifest to creating a better police force in South Africa? And I'm confident we have not reached that conversation yet, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I think, part of the danger with the way that both the ad hoc committee and the commission were defined is that they focused on Nkwanezi's allegations. And so we focus on that. And we don't focus on what came just before that, was the Inspector General of Intelligence recommending prosecutions against Khumalo and Masemola.
Which has now become a huge issue.
And that's not discussed because it's not, it's not. So far the focus has been, in other words, the narrative has been controlled onto a particular track by defining it that way, instead of looking at the broader picture, and I agree with Nkwanezi that the whole of crime intelligence should start again. We need proper legislation to govern it. And at the moment, crime intelligence just falls under the general intelligence legislation. There isn't police-specific crime intelligence legislation. We need that. We need transparency. We need all these things. And I think if that can come out of the commission and the ad hoc committee, the Parliament can write its own legislation. It doesn't have to wait for government to write it. They have the power to do that. It's called a committee bill. Maybe if that can come out of this, then there'll be some good out of this process. But at the moment, it's looking, there isn't direction. It's looking a little bit all over the place.
Sure, and it makes it a very difficult time for us journalists and researchers to stay abreast and keep track of everything, but you've done an excellent job. Jean Redpath is a senior researcher at the Dullah Omar Institute at the University of the Western Cape, and her latest piece, just to remind our lead listeners and News 24 subscribers, Political Killings Task Team burned millions whilst KwaZulu-Natal murder rate exploded. Jean, I'm going to let you go. I think you've got many other media interviews waiting, right? Thanks for your time on the lead.
Okay, thanks. Cheers.
Trending topic.
Moving to our trending topic. This is it. It's the last chance rodeo for the boys in yellow and green, following their, let's just call it disappointing, dismal, if you will, draw to our neighbours Zimbabwe on Friday. Well, the gist is this, right? Bafana Bafana, they got to beat their final foes of Rwanda decisively. That's a decent goal margin to try and top the current log and qualify for next year's FIFA World Cup in North America. Well, catching us up and coaching us on the high stakes is our News 24 football journalist who made his debut in the lead in our last edition. That's Tashreeq Vardien. He covered that Zim match in Durban on Friday. He's live with us in our Cape Town studios now. Tashreeq, what happened, man?
Hey, Graham, it's good to be home, man. What happened? You are start. That's the most important thing.
Look, we tried to attack early on in their half.
Yeah.
But according to Coach Hugo Bruce, I mean, Zimbabwe gave us a little bit of a tough time, right?
I think in our conversation on Friday, we spoke about how important it is, to at least get the upper hand on these Zimbabweans. And true to form, I mean, they came out guns blazing, to be honest with you, and they blocked every effort. I mean, luck was essentially not on our side. We hit the post thrice, Lyle Foster got his chance, kicked off the goal line, like everything, and then out of the nowhere, we got some red cards in between for much more drama than we anticipated. But as per usual, when these two teams clash, it somehow just ends up in a tit for tat, unfortunately. As we've seen, we've discussed, Bafana have the best record over Zimbabwe. But in the end, we looked at that game wholly, and we just basically think to ourselves, like, how we didn't get that victory. And not only a victory, how we didn't go on to go score 1, 2, 3, perhaps 4 goals, because there was we had like 23 shots on target.
Sure.
I think it was only not 23 shots on target, forgive me, 23 shots at goal,
right,
with only 3 shots on target.
Okay. Surely one of those should have been a goal.
Surely one of those should have ended up in the back of the net, which was unfortunate. And luck really wasn't on our side. I mean, we know we have people that complain and stuff like that. We know that the calculators also have to come out again, which is very a familiar thing. As I hear your grunt in the background.
But silver lining, skipper Ron Williams, at least he kept his clean sheet.
Yeah, that's the most silver lining. But at the same time, in the end, I mean, Ron didn't really have to make that significant saves at the end of the day, because South Africa had 70% position.
Yeah, they're kind of like in a sense the game was mostly in their half, right?
I would say the second half majority. That's why we have the position at 70%, which made things rather interesting. And being in that stadium, I mean, writing your first take with all that energy in the background, smelling things at the same time that we shouldn't be smelling in a stadium, which I welcome and I also don't welcome at the same time. But it was entertaining nonetheless, just being there in the thick of things.
Yeah, how was the Gears?
The Gears was amazing. I don't think South Africa, since returning from AFCON last year, coming home with bronze medal, I think South African fans has really started to get behind the Bafana Bafana team again.
Sure, yeah.
So we've sold out every home match that we've been a part of on home soil.
Yeah, it's not as if we're playing cuck, bro. We're not playing cuck.
We're not. We're not at all. We're playing beautiful football. The only thing that's not happening for us is the goals, and which is an unfortunate thing. And if I could just add to that, South Africa has not lost a match since the 2024 AFCON against Mali.
Sure.
Yes, we lost to Nigeria, but essentially that was a 1-1 draw. Then it had to go to penalties.
Yes.
And then obviously the Mokoena gate. The result that was reversed. We essentially won 2-0 and we reversed to 3-0. So those are the only 2 blemishes, which essentially is not really cutting out defeats.
Yeah.
South Africa are really, has a strong defensive line. Their spine is very strong, and it helps South Africa to get to this point.
Yeah. I was in London when the Super Eagles beat us, and I was actually at a pub just off Trafalgar Square, and I went to, it's called the Shakespeare. As I walked in, the bartender helped me, and he picked up on my accent, and he's like, "Where are you from?" So I was like, "I'm from South Africa," and he turned to me and he's like, "I'm really sorry, hey?" And he was a Nigerian bloke. And funny enough, the Nigerian sort of embassy is like right around the corner, so I was like, this is so strange and serendipitous. Anyway, side point. Okay, it's a Rwanda time, but they're kind of like, we've got a bit of a rivalry with them, which I actually didn't really know an awful lot about, to be honest. They've beaten us once before. We've got a lot to prove. We do need to beat them decisively, right? We need a 2-goal difference against them to kind of stay in this thing, and then hope, right, that Nigeria beats Benin, which is Benin is the front runners to be qualified for next year's tournament. Do I have that all correctly?
Correct, 1,000% correct. And I may just add that Nigeria also has a chance to qualify for the World Cup if South Africa loses against Rwanda. So, yeah, the puzzle, the permutations is chaotic and tense everywhere. So, if Nigeria wins and South Africa wins, then South Africa goes through. But at the same time, you're speaking about two nations, Nigeria and South Africa. The diaspora in South Africa at the same time is, I think, it's only second to Zimbabwe, if I'm not mistaken. And then take that into consideration as well. It makes things rather more interesting nonetheless. And so if Nigeria wins, South Africa goes through. If Nigeria wins, South Africa loses, Nigeria goes through. So, and what makes this even more dramatic at the same time, that both matches kick off at 6 o'clock. So both teams won't really know, but at the same time they will know, because fans will mention it to the players on the field as well. I mean, when South Africa were playing against Zimbabwe, Benin scored in the 80th minute to win their match 1-0. And you could just feel that last 15 minutes in that game against Zimbabwe, you could really hear the fans cheering on South Africa to get that goal, to get that winning goal. Because if they had won, they would move to similar points as Benin, which was 17.
Yes.
And that would have taken a bit of ease off South Africa against Rwanda at the same
It wouldn't
time.
have been decisive, but at least we'd have been in a little bit more of a comfortable position.
Exactly.
Right?
Much more closer than we are right now.
It's like Bafana's really like, we want more. Either they really want more challenges here, or there's something else afoot here. But obviously, and we've ventilated this in our previous discussion, Mokoena Gate is the whole reason why we're now in this high stakes predicament. But there's a big push now to fill up Mbombela Stadium in formerly known as Nelspruit, because tickets are a lot more affordable, as you've previously said, than the Springboks. I'm sure we can expect a lot more cheers to back the boys on Tuesday, right?
Yeah, I think lots of players are even calling for fans to come to the stadium. I know, as you mentioned, there's sort of somewhat of a rivalry because of what happened almost 2 years ago, where South Africa suffered a shock defeat, I guess in Kigali against Rwanda, which was 2-0. And surprisingly enough, that was their first game between the two sides since 1992. Wow! So, which is interesting nonetheless. But if we look at the table right now, Rwanda don't really have a chance, but at the same time, there's somewhat redemption. So I think South Africa will get this over the line. The only thing that's standing between us is the result between Nigeria and Benin. And I really think fans will go out and sell out that stadium. That's a nice statistic to have behind the boys. Although we don't really make it at the end of the day, although there's this dark cloud that has often followed Bafana Bafana in I guess the latter years.
Well, 2 decades.
2 decades. I mean, we have a renewed system now, and I'd say in this past 18 months, as I've mentioned before. And it's quite interesting to see how things are right now, and fascinating, but also at the same time, I think we're in a good nick. And I think we just keep on going, keep on building on this. After this, however, if I could just on a side note, I mean, from an administration point of view, given obviously the Mokoena Gate, hopefully something can happen there as well, as the boys do their work on the field. Maybe in the back room we can start following in similar footsteps as the Proteas, as the Springboks, as they have done, reformed sort of that background thing and help Bafana Bafana move forward. Because the boys on the field, they are doing the work. We have to set that aside. We have to let people know that. And I think South Africans know that. And what they do know is that Safa hasn't really been, at the level we expect him to be.
In terms of In terms of being stricter, in terms of that level of professionalism
Yes.
that we're seeing replicated in the Proteas and the Springboks.
Yes, very strict, keep a sense of level of expectations, what we want from them. And they need to just follow through on the things that they said that they will follow through, because we know the story when it comes to SAFA.
Yeah. I had a rant over the weekend, and I'm trying to be positive.
Yeah.
I'm trying
It's
to be
difficult,
positive.
I won't lie.
Yeah.
It is difficult.
Who are those players to look out for? Let's end off here, and then we can obviously have another debrief after the game. But who are those guys that you're looking out for to rock up on the day and really give it their all against Rwanda?
Lyle Foster was pretty amazing against Zimbabwe. It's just unfortunate he didn't get that goal. Oscar Nepal is at the same time. We can't forget about Tebogo Mokoena himself. He didn't really have a good game against Zimbabwe. I might add that.
His spirits are probably low after the whole fiasco,
But at the same time, he's such a world-class player that he can go out and do the business. And then at the same time, Ronwen Williams was being a brick on the walls for Bafana Bafana.
He is really one of the best goalkeepers we've ever had,
So those, I would say, are the players that go out and do the trick. At the same time, Bafana also have had some injuries and that they've had to... Hugo Bruce had to make significant changes with Patrick Masongani, Rele Boching, Mafokeng at the same time, Ikram Reyners. Those are three players that would have really, really helped Bafana in these matches. Even if they weren't to start, but come off the bench and give South Africa and Bafana that extra flair, that extra push to go for that goal. So hopefully we can get some 3 goals and then... hope on the other
and pop the champagne, baby. Okay, 6 p.m. Mbombela Stadium, Tuesday. The News 24 Sport team will have it covered, right?
Yes, Jabulo will be on the ground. He's currently en route to Nelspruit. So Bafana have the Matchday 1 press conference at 3:30 today, then followed by Rwanda's coach at the same time at 5 o'clock. Then onwards, tomorrow, we have a live first take analysis from myself and Njabulo. And let's hope that we can bring it home. If not,
we'll drink anyway.
As South Africans do.
That's Tashreeq Vardien. He's one of our premier football journalists here at News 24. I really appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ram. This was lekker, man.
Cheers, bro.
And finally,
ending off with On This Day in South African History, the 13th of October, 1990. Today we look back to a landmark moment in South African and continental history. On this day, Johannesburg hosted the continent's very first lesbian and gay pride march. It was organized by the gay and lesbian organization of the Witwatersrand, otherwise known as GLOW. It drew around 800 brave participants at a time when being openly gay in this country could still cost you your safety, your job, or worse. It was both a pride parade and a protest against apartheid. Activists including Beverly Ditzi, Simon and Corley, as well as Justice Edwin Cameron, had led the call for visibility and equality. Simon and Corley told the crowd, quote unquote, "I am black and I am gay. I cannot separate the two parts of me. They are one struggle." Many marchers wore masks to protect their identities, facing taunts from religious groups and conservative onlookers. Though despite the tension, the mood was defiant and celebratory, with the chant ringing out, quote unquote, "out of the closet and into the streets." Well, that first march paved the way for the pride events we see across all 9 provinces today. And whilst the debate continues over whether pride should be more political or celebratory, its roots remain in courage and in claiming space loudly and proudly in a South Africa once built to silence difference. That's On This Day in History, the 13th of October, 1990. As I said at the beginning of today's show, the lead continues to rack up thousands upon thousands of listens. And if you'd feel like your corporate or business would like to perhaps have a stake in the show by advertising in this very space, please feel free to mail us thelead@24.com and we'll put you in connection with our appropriate salespeople. In the meantime, you can hit the like, follow, and subscribe buttons on Spotify, Apple, YouTube. That way you can know exactly when our next edition drops. We've got 3 more, of course, this week, normal, regular broadcasting, all of which are coming out Monday to Thursday at 7 p.m. My name's Graham Robenheimer, and so long as there's trusted news first, we'll have the lead.